I took a 10-mile ride by car from Hala Amzala to the Petersburg Abbey, built in 1128 by Konrad I of Wettin. It is a beautiful old abbey, which is still in use today.
Hello, my name is James Udall. I am in History 405, Professor Milliman's class. I'm here in Petersburg. This is December 4th, 2018. I'm here on a field trip to visit the Abbey where the Count Konrad I of Meissen is laid to rest. He also was a monk here for a short period of time after he retired from his office and he gave away his land, his titles, his money to his sons. He became a monk here and lived out the rest of his life. We're here to meet with Brother Johannes, who is the prior here at the Petersburg Abbey, to find out about the history of the Abbey, to find out if he has some hidden information about Konrad, and to get some more information. So we're about to go inside and very excited.
As I walked through the courtyard and I approached the abbey, I noticed that there was a very small doorway. It was a lot smaller than I had expected, and it reminded me of the parable that Jesus told in Matthew 19:23 about it being easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. And I wonder if the purpose of the small doorway was a reminder of that parable. As you walk into the chapel through the very narrow aperture, you're forced to bow your head to get in. It is impossible to walk into the chapel standing straight up.
We're here at in the choir of the chapel. So we're at the opposite end of the Petersburg Abbey. You can see this is where the altar would be, and the choir, and perhaps even the baptismal font. We have the transept here. So this is a traditional Latin church in the form of a crucifix. Transept, and looking back down the nave, recumbent statues of Konrad and his family are. So, for such an old building, it's in very, very good shape, and as you can see, it's used actively as a church. So they have church services and they have other official gatherings here. Okay, we're at the back of the nave, the back of the chapel, and there are 7 or 8 recumbent statues of Konrad. Konrad is here, the very first one. He is laying next to his wife, who died several years before him. This is his family, and these are all effigies here at the Petersburg Abbey. It looks as though they have their coat of arms above them, and there are engravings at the foot of the, I don't know if you would call this a crypt, but at the foot of the crypt there are engravings. So very interesting. and we'll get a close-up of Konrad's effigy in just a moment.
We later learned in 1565, during a lightning storm, the chapel was struck by lightning and it caught fire. A great portion of the chapel and the abbey was destroyed. In 1567, they started to make repairs, and these recumbent statues that you see were part of the 1567 repair and reconstruction effort that took place. Okay, standing in front of a stone rendering of, I think this is Konrad also. You can see he is being depicted as a knight. He has a broadsword. He has a crusading cross on his chest. We'll determine if this is a cross from the Templar Knights. It looks as though he's holding some type of a Romanesque style church. So we'll find out more information about this after our interview. So anyway, this may be Konrad, but we cannot read the Latin script on the sides. The high relief sculpture actually did turn out to be Konrad. There were a couple questions that we were able to answer. First, we've gone on the assumption that he could have been, or maybe was, a Templar Knight. The prior of the St. Petersburg Abbey, Brother Johannes, disputes that and says that he does not believe that Konrad was a Templar Knight, although he was a knight, just not with the distinction of being in the Templar order. Also, the church building that he's holding in his hand is a representation of what the church looked like that he built in 1128. All of the high relief sculptures that we saw near the back of the chapel along the sides of the arcade were actually brought in the mid-19th century, when the chapel and abbey were completely repaired and rebuilt and reconsecrated. Here in the nave of the chapel, there is a marker here on the floor commemorating Konrad the Great. It's dated with his death year of 1157. There's flowers here marking the site. This is our second or third time here, so there's been flowers here every time that we visited. The architecture of the chapel is done in a Romanesque style. You have Roman arches. They're not Gothic arches. And it's very beautiful. In a Romanesque chapel, you don't have those huge panels of stained glass like you do in a Gothic chapel or cathedral. The feeling in a Romanesque church is very, very different. All of the light that floods a Gothic cathedral through its stained glass windows is meant to transport the worshiper to another plane, almost like taking them to heaven on earth. This Romanesque cathedral chapel is a lot simpler. It's darker. It's more personal, more intimate. We learned from our interview with Brother John that in November of 1156, Konrad gave up everything to become a monk at this abbey. He gave up his titles as count. He gave up his lands, his castles, his holdings, his money. He dispersed everything to his sons, and he became a simple, poor, devout, pious monk. This is absolutely unheard of. Brother Johannes also showed us a architectural rendering of the Petersburg Abbey as it looked in the 1820s before it had been completely rebuilt in the 1850s. If you look to the left, you can see one of the original pieces of the abbey that had been built in the 1120s that had been destroyed by that lightning storm and fire in 1565. It's amazing what they've done with it since. They've completely rebuilt it, and they have brought it back to its original glory. It's amazing. This image you're looking at is how the abbey looked in 1860 after the reconstruction was done. So the first image was a before, and this one is an after.
Okay, so what did we learn? We learned that the original abbey that was built in 1128 was destroyed by lightning and a fire in the year 1565. There was a temporary building constructed in 1567, and only a piece of the original 12th century building still exists, and that was the area of the building where I was standing at earlier by the altar. So around the middle of the 19th century, they reconstructed the abbey around the remaining piece of the 12th century building that had been destroyed. So it's kind of a bit of the original and a reconstruction, and I think that they did a nice job. So there you go.
What's the takeaway here? I think like that doorway had reminded me of the parable that Jesus told, that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. I think Konrad really believed that. And at the end of the day, here's a guy who has enormous wealth, and he gives it away. He turns his back on his earthly possessions, and he becomes a monk.